Welcome to Chapter 11 of Integrated Activism, the book published by Alexis Ziegler through North Atlantic Books. This is the final slideshow. These slideshows are a quick overview of the chapters themselves. The book itself, of course, goes into more detail. The long curve and the short curve. We have developed an illusion in our time that we lead culture forward with our ideas, we lead our society forward with our ideas, our politics, our religion, our persuasive abilities. And this idea has been promulgated and promoted by leaders of every stripe, religious, academic, political. The reality is that history moves with a long sloping curve. So I've created a kind of a graph here on the left of the long sloping curve, and you could call that the curve of the darker line curve of the curve of resource use and the growth and collapse of major civilizations. So as civilizations grow, particularly imperial societies such as the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the modern American Empire, there's a tremendous growth of resource usage. What tends to happen is as there's a growth of resource availability procured through imperial means, there's a kind of convulsive growth. These arrows represent, in a kind of graphical sense, a rough graphical sense, the expansion of civil liberty to more and more people. So we tend to think of the short curve leading the long curve. We tend to think of our ideas as carrying the material culture forward, when the opposite is really true. The long curve kind of drags the short curve behind it in an uneven fashion. So, as we discussed earlier in the chapter about democracy is the process by which economically integrated people express their power in the political system. So as more and more people become economically empowered, economically integrated, they gain more power to express that power in the political system. Now, it's historically in oligarchic societies or in democratic societies, it's always been oligarchic. It's always been a narrow band at the top who among themselves has some democratic power. Now that band of people, how many people are in that democratic echelon, has increased tremendously in the industrial age. But nonetheless, the long curve drags the short curve along. So as imperial civilizations grow and the number of people who are economically empowered grow, the number of people and the civil liberties of the people at that upper echelon, the number of people involved in democratic processes grows convulsively through various social movements. But as a society goes into decline, imperial civilizations, the resource availability to that civilization decline, and it drags down the democratic process with it. The short curve follows the long curve. We tend to think of it in the opposite way, but that is just not true. It's an illusion we have created. Now, what is the long curve for modern industrial civilization? This is a graph a few years old now. It's from the peak oil movement, which has lost favor now that fracking has brought on a new layer of cheap oil. But nonetheless, even with fracking, this blue area down here is what we're concerned with the most. That is conventional oil, cheap, easy oil. Has been in decline for a while now. Now we're making it up with other kinds of oil, but we are somewhere right up here nearing the plateau of industrial civilization. In general, democracy is holding up okay, at least for the upper echelons of society, but as we go over the top of that curve, history will be very clear. History is very clear about what's going to happen. Here's another representation. This is a wonderful graph created by Charles Hall of the long curve, if you will. Now, fracking and various other new extraction techniques have kept the price of oil low, but nonetheless, there's been this tremendous decrease in the availability or the efficiency of extracting energy from modern industrial civilization. So this graph, I think I may have showed this earlier in an earlier slideshow, but in any case, the horizontal graph is volume of oil, the vertical graph is efficiency of extraction. So if you look up here, domestic oil in 1930, we weren't extracting all that much, but it was about 100 to 1. We could use 1 barrel of oil to get back 100. By 1970, we were using about 30 to get back 1 to get back 30. Imported oil is about 1 to 30. If you look at the various other energy sources, coal is about 60 to 1. Down here in the bottom, biodiesel, gasohol, tar sands, those are kind of the energies of the future. They're very small and very inefficient. And that inefficiency is what puts us on the far side of the curve. We will continue to extract energy, but it's going to be available to fewer and fewer people into the future, and that's going to have a tremendous impact on our civil society and every corner of our leadership, every aspect of our leadership. Academic, religious, political doesn't want to say that. Now, a lot of people know this. This is all kind of 101 for informed environmentalists. The question of how we build movements, we've become a mass-oriented society, and it's really quite unfortunate because it's another illusion that we suffer from, that everything has to happen from the top down. So we have pictures of great leaders of history standing in front of great crowds. We have Gandhi and Martin Luther King standing in front of hundreds of thousands of people. The reality is that social movements start with an individual, and they often start small, and for many years they are small. I know I've organized quite a number of small-scale campaigns, and I joke about it. I tell people, you can count on it. The first time you do a demonstration, the first time you do anything, it's going to be in a cold rain, and you're going to be by yourself. And the second time, when you might talk when your friends will be joining you, and the third time, you get a couple of friends. Finally, the media will show up, they'll make fun of you. By your fourth or fifth demonstration, the media will show up and say, well, you guys are serious. You'll coerce some of your other friends to get involved, and it really has to build over time. So, we want to see ourselves in the role of great leaders, perhaps, or in great movements, and really, at the beginning phases of a movement, we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to stand up for what's right. And at this point in history, what's right is addressing the environmental crisis that we're facing and tying it back to our political culture in spite of what our leadership tries to do. I call that constructive panic. This is a picture from the recent climate march in New York City, which was a wonderful march. Although I have to say, as many commentators have said, the march was very clear about what it was against and less clear about what it was for. And so the mainstream environmental movement wants to put these big windmills on the mountaintop, and as we've discussed in other slideshows, that's not going to work. In terms of movement building, though, which we want to focus on right now, we are very much affected by the people around us. If you're in a bus or in a car, just around a dinner table, and somebody gets angry about something, it's going to cause you to get agitated. If somebody gets frightened, it's going to cause you to get nervous. If somebody gets happy, it might lift your mood. We impact other people. And in this case, in responding to the crisis that we face, the consolidation of corporate power, as it is very closely tied to the destruction of the global environment, the appropriate moral and rational response is constructive panic. To begin to show some signs of, yes, this is very serious, we need to respond to it, we need to respond to it with every ounce of energy. Trying to be selfish in a time like this is, as they would say, rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. Our only hope is to band together, form a movement that can respond to this, and do it now. Do it so other friends can see you, so they start to respond. What does that look like? It means leading the curve. So here we are again with that big black curve. The thing with that big black curve is industrial civilization is extremely inefficient. We've got people driving around in automobiles, at least in the United States, living in big houses, doing all this crazy stuff to use up tremendous amounts of energy. So the reality is that we can decrease our energy use. We can lead the curve. So let's just make up a number and say that decline, the big black curve at the upper left of the screen there, let's say that this curve up here, that's a 5% decline rate. Well, let's say this is a 6% decline rate. So if we can decrease our energy use faster than the contraction of energy that is available, and use that energy that's available to build a few solar panels, windmills, better houses, to reconstruct our infrastructure to support ourselves without fossil fuel. As one might know, I work on a project called Living Energy Farm, livingenergyfarm.org. I'm not the only person working on that project, but we're building a farm in a community that operates without any fossil fuel, simply to show that it can be done, among other things. But it's not that hard living with dramatically less fossil fuel, or even none at all, if you have access to a few solar panels, some solar reflective material, some water storage tanks, some decent water pumps, a bit of basic machinery, and you can live quite a comfortable lifestyle with very little or no fossil fuel, at least on a daily basis. Mostly what it means is localism. We see the lower picture there. That's a street economy, street culture, and that this is one simple little picture, but that reclaiming local power is at the psychological, political, economic, ecological level. It is at every level. It's what we have to do, and we have to be organized about it. It's not just a question of going out and shopping for more, environmentally sustainable products or products that were traded on a fair basis. I mean, those things are worth thinking about, certainly, but what matters is that we get together as a social movement and begin to need the things we can produce locally and produce the things that we need locally, and to build our political movements locally, to start out panicking more than our friends think is appropriate, to get them involved in the process. That's going to look like a social movement over time. It's something we have to do. Going back to the very beginning, we remember that this is Dagon, the fish god, that this was a deity worshipped by people in modern Lebanon. I use this picture over and over again to try to show people cultural, political, symbolic, ethical layers of our culture are built on the economic, ecological foundation of our culture. This is not something the historians want to talk about. So what does that mean for us going forwards? It means we consciously recreate that process. So if we want a democratic society, it's hardly more than intuition to say that a society whose food sources, whose energy, whose water, everything is owned by centralized corporate power will not be a democratic society for long. Whereas if food is produced at the local level, energy is produced, political power is based at the local level, then it will have a tremendous impact on our political, religious, symbolic, ethical, intellectual systems. But we can't do it from the top down. We have to do it from the bottom up. And your leaders are going to tell you the opposite from now until forever. They don't want our leadership, every level of our leadership, Democratic, Republican, environmental, among the big environmental groups want to make themselves seem more important than dirt and oil. Dirt and oil is what drives our ethical systems forward. We have this whole myth of ethical evolution that when we look at these horrible things that have happened in different times and places of history, what humans can do to each other in terms of cruelty, in terms of a lack of democracy, in terms of oppression and repression, we think we've grown out of that. We have not grown out of it. We have simply developed a society that is wealthy enough that we can force it off on other people. We have made ourselves think that we are not connected to dirt and oil, and it is dirt and oil that determines ultimately, or has an overwhelming influence in the bigger picture over the course of broader spans of time on our ethical systems, how we treat each other, our own moral evolution. This idea that moral evolution happens in defiance of dirt and oil is just it's a self-delusion. It's a psychosis we have developed, a collective psychosis. And to clarify a bit, oil is a metaphor for energy sources, which in this day and age allow us to interact with the environment. So if we deplete the soil in one place, we can use energy to haul food from somewhere else. Dirt is a metaphor for the stability of ecological systems and our ability to grow food and extract other very vital things from ecological systems. Dirt, or perhaps soil is the more appropriate term, is a living ecosystem, and we are wholly dependent on those ecosystems. We are dependent on the ecosystems, and we're dependent on the energy that allows us to manipulate those ecosystems. So we have to recreate that process from the ground up, take control of how we manage our own soil, how we manage our own energy sources. If we manage to do that, it's never been done. Every major social movement in history has been extractive. Even when we look at the most noble of social movements, like Gandhi in India, the nonviolent movement, it was a nationalist movement at heart. Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement. He was a prominent leader of the civil rights movement. And it was, of course, a necessary, appropriate, and worthwhile movement, but it was also selfish at some level. It was appropriately selfish, shall we say. But this movement we're trying to create, selfish in the sense of African Americans were trying to gain more civil liberties for themselves, which was a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But what we're trying to do is historically unprecedented, which is a broader vision. It's a movement for our children instead of for ourselves. And it's never really been done. Every social movement, left and right, tends to want a bigger piece of the pie, whether it's civil liberties or feminist or Marxist, communist, whatever. In modern times, at least, it's a bigger piece of the industrial pie. How many dollars can I get a car and houses and more middle-class privileges for my followers? It's difficult. We have to create a whole different kind of movement. We have to create a movement that is intellectually understands the longer-term impacts of our actions and works together to address those actions. I'm certain it can be done. I think it's going to be a multi-level movement, economic, ecological, political, cultural, religious. We need to develop a spirituality that understands our powerful connection to the ecosystems that support us. If you look at anthropology, this slide is called the First Great Leap. There was a tipping point in human evolution. We have a picture of the Neanderthals on the left and a picture of modern humans on the right. Not that much difference in terms of how much physiological change there has been from previous humans to modern humans. But there was a tremendous cultural difference, and it was closely linked to our evolution. At some point, there was a kind of a takeoff. Neanderthals and other early hominids were running around doing their thing. But at some point, some tens of thousands of years ago, there's a noticeable shift in cultural complexity. And that anthropologist has referred to as the First Great Leap. It seems to be when our modern, sophisticated culture first took root, when we became very cultural beings, capable of organizing ourselves on a more sophisticated level. What we're talking about in modern times is the Second Great Leap, and it's community. It's community, it's understanding our own cultural evolution, the science of our own cultural evolution. And there is a piece of science there. We need to understand this whole process by which we are created as humans. We are created in social groups. We create this culture that is very sophisticated, very technological, socially, mechanically. Where does that come from? Well, we have to apply some science, some systematic study to understand where our own culture comes from, and we have to apply that science to a social movement that plans for our future, which is going to be based in community, because it has to be. And if we do that, it will be a second great leap. It will be a leap from non-conscious cultural evolution to conscious cultural evolution, because that whole cultural evolutionary process, historically, we haven't understood it. We haven't had the science, we haven't had the breadth of knowledge, and in modern times, if anything, I think we are less aware than we were some thousands of years ago when we lived in simpler societies, because of the stratification of societies has led to so many divergence of interests and so much repression of social awareness. So the second great leap, that is our task. It is a social movement that is unprecedented. The great unraveling that is before us, the collapse as various people have called it, it's going to be a contraction, I think is a more accurate word, of industrial production, which is going to have tremendous social pressure, and of course the middle and upper classes are going to try to push that pressure downward. But that's going to be an opening, a time in which people will question greatly, and we have to take advantage of that time to try to create a less selfish movement, a broader movement, a movement that is based on a scientific understanding of human culture, that has a spiritual devotion to nature and the natural systems that support us, and understands the connection between the two, and rebuilds our culture from the ground up, from community-based economic systems up to syndicated, if you want to use that term, or just coordinated political systems on a bigger scale. As long as we have large numbers of people on the earth, we're going to have some sort of bigger political structures, and keeping those political structures honest, intelligent, and coherent is not an easy task. If we can do this, if we can create the conscious culture we are looking for, it will be a second great leap. It will be a whole new form of human evolution, of human cultural evolution. And Integrated Activism is my term. My publishers told me, worked out the title together, for the social movement that could bring that about. So, thank you for listening. The book is available through North Atlantic Publishers. You can get in touch with me through my website, conav.org, conev.org. Thank you. Have a good day.